Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Food Safety Fridays, edition 18. Delighted to say we've got Dr. Britta Ball, Principal Consultant Advancing Food Safety Culture with us again today. Britta did a fantastic presentation a number of weeks ago. I can see we've got a huge number of registrations for today, 786, which is fantastic. So today's presentation, 7 best practices to improve food safety culture. I'll just read the synopsis. Food safety culture is being called an emerging risk in the food industry. Progress in the food safety arena has traditionally been led by research in the natural sciences, a comfortable field for most food safety and quality assurance professionals, but a food safety culture doesn't grow in a lab. What is a culture of food safety? What influences it? How can it be measured? What are the challenges and implications related to it? So this presentation will provide insights into the science of organizational culture and introduce best practice that could make positive difference to a food safety culture. Last week, we had a few problems with the chat not working, which was very disappointing. So I had to ask all the questions myself, so hopefully it covers some of those questions, but it was a very good presentation anyway. Today we've got a few more challenges today, but we hope to, basically Britta's webcam is not working at the moment, so we're going to have to work around that. Also, her screen share is not working, so I'm going to somehow have to share the presentation while Britta discusses it. But we've had lots of trials and tribulations with these webinars over the weeks, but we always overcome them and manage to get through and do a good performance. Okay, what I'll do then now, I will try to share the presentation. Are you there, Britta?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Simon.
Good. Right. So at least we've got audio. So let me just give me a few seconds, ladies and gentlemen, while I try to get this PowerPoint up. Okay, we've got plenty of interaction as we did with previously with Britta's presentation today. We've got some polls and some interaction throughout, so hopefully you'll join in with that. So I'll pass you over now to Britta, and you can start your presentation now, Britta.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved and give another presentation to the audience this time. As we're going to be going through a little bit of an interesting process here with me having to provide some input as to when the slides are going to go to the next one. But so just bear with us as we continue on, and I'm looking forward to this program. I'd also at this point like to thank the sponsors and also to IFSQN for hosting these events. It's just a wonderful opportunity to share information with food safety and quality assurance practitioners around the world. So again, this presentation is about the 7 best practices to improve food safety culture. So Simon, you can go to the next slide. And so what I wanted to first do is just to give just an overview of where I'm coming from, what my background is. So I've got I did my undergraduate in dairy science at the University of Guelph, and from there I worked at Kraft Foods and Gailey Foods. I also worked in inspection in dairy farm and plant inspection, and then I went to teach at Kemptville College, which is now part of the University of Guelph. From there, I went to the Ontario government, and I worked for a number of years in leadership and organization development and community development, where I spent a lot of time learning more about training, adult education, and developing people. And then most recently, I returned to the food safety arena and got my PhD in food safety management systems, looking at the factors that influence workers to follow food safety management systems. And that's where I am today, and bringing together the skills, my skills and experience and knowledge in both food science, food safety, and adult education training and learning, to bring that together to help people improve their food safety culture, help businesses improve their culture of food safety. So thanks, Simon. We can go to the next slide.
Sorry, Britta. Okay. Yeah.
So the slide share coming back?
Yeah, sorry, am I back on webcam?
Yes, you're back on webcam.
All right, apologies. Okay.
Okay, so thanks, Simon. So we're just going to, the overview for the presentation, there are really two basic parts to this. The first is the foundation. So I wanted to provide you some background about what organizational culture is and about food safety culture. And then I wanted to talk about some best practices. Now, I identified 7 best practices, but within that and within the time frame that we have, I'm not going to be able to go into depth in any one of those areas. So it will really be an overview. What are the 7 areas to really focus on to help improve food safety culture? So then next, Simon.
Okay.
I just go next slide and then.
Sure.
So what I wanted to talk about first then is the foundation, the culture of food safety. And food safety culture makes news if it's bad food safety culture, mostly anyway. So there are examples of the Tudor Butcher in Wales, and Peanut Corporation of America, and the horse meat scandal in Europe, DeCoster eggs in the United States, where there were billions of eggs that had to be recalled, and some people died from salmonellosis. And in Canada, XL Foods Incorporated. Next slide. So I wanted to give a brief overview of XL Foods and an outbreak that happened with XL Foods in the fall of 2012. XL Foods in Canada is in Alberta. It's the second largest beef, or was the second largest beef processor in Canada, and it slaughtered over 40%, or about 40% of the beef in the country. In the fall of 2012, there was an outbreak of E. coli 0157H7, and there were 11 confirmed cases of the disease. In the end, there were over 2,500 beef products that were recalled, which was equivalent to more than 4,000 metric tons of product. Next. And so if we think about that in terms of what the issues were at XL Foods, we think about their HACCP plan. The HACCP plan approach, you design it, you implement it, you monitor, and you evaluate it. Well, at XL Foods, what was found was that the HACCP plan was acceptable, so that it was designed well enough, but it wasn't implemented. And the plant couldn't quickly provide monitoring and verification records. And from 2009 to 2012, there had been no review of the HACCP plan. Next. And so that really was non-compliance and lack of inspection from the CFIA perspective. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency wasn't doing a good job of inspecting, and there's also non-compliance at the plant itself. So after that outbreak, September was the outbreak was confirmed. In the beginning of October, the XL Foods manager spoke publicly and said the outbreak was really was a surprise. Although I know personally that I had heard from somebody that one of my colleagues at the University of Guelph when I was there, that the general manager said to him, "Well, we always have a problem with E. coli at this time of year." And so it ought not to have been, maybe the outbreak was a surprise, but an increase in E. coli 0157H7 counts was obviously not a surprise based on the information that I heard from my colleague. So in October of 2012, JBS Foods from JBS from Brazil took over the plant management. And then in January 2013, JBS took ownership of the plant. Next. And then JBS in 2014, this is 13 to 15 months later, CFIA reported some issues. And some of these issues included inadequate training. These are just quotes from the reports that were made public through the Freedom of Information Act that was obtained, reports obtained by CTV News, and just reported in last month, at the end of last month. And so a sample taker, there was somebody was taking samples of the beef, and in order to take samples, you're supposed to take them at different locations in the combo, and the CFIA inspector noticed that the person was taking them right close to the same area. And when asked about that, the sample taker said she wasn't really wasn't paying attention. Another area was that on-site verification was not documented in a timely manner. And there were more instances of issues that CFIA had found at JBS Canada 13 to 15 months after the JBS had taken over from XL Foods. Next slide. So there's a prime example of how culture wins. So XL Foods really was still there in a way, even though it was a new name, a new company. Some of the employees, in fact, maybe the majority of employees were the same ones. And the question is that I would have is, well, what would JBS Canada have done to have changed the culture of food safety in that plant? And it seems that it did not do well, in helping to move a culture forward and changing that. So this is what we mean by culture. So the next slide. So all food companies have a food safety culture. Sometimes they make bad choices, sometimes they make good choices. Next. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do a poll right now. I'd like you to rate the food safety culture in your workplace. So what's okay. The worst I can think of is at a -3, and the best in class would be a +3. Where do you think your workplace would rate in terms of food safety culture?
Okay, I can see people voting live, and we'll let this run for 30 seconds or so. But
sure, that would be great.
We've got at the moment, the peak is 41% +1, 26% +2. Yeah, so that's where we sort of see the height of it. 39%, 40% +1, and then 25% +2, 8% +3. So we've got some extremely good cultures there. And then down the other way, 13% 0, 4% -1, 4% -2, and 1% -3.
Okay, so well, that's good that the majority are at least in the plus side, and so there's we can have a range of from a strongly bad, a strongly negative food safety culture, all the way to a strongly positive food safety culture, with the majority in at the weekly to mid-range positive food safety culture. So that's excellent. That's really encouraging. So next slide, Simon.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do then to give you an overview of culture and sort of a brief overview from the science of culture and how that takes place. So Edgar Schein is a retired professor from MIT, researcher and professor at MIT, and he focused on organizational culture and national culture and things like that. He talked about there being 3 levels of culture. One is at the core, those are the assumptions about how things are. That's really the way we do things around here. The middle level is values, which are talked about, their strategies, their goals, their philosophies that our organization would have. And at the artifact level, those would be visible organizational structures and processes. They'd be things that people could see when they walked into the plant. We'll focus on it being an organization of business. So, and visible things could be, say, your mission statement on the wall, and a vision statement that's visible to the public when they come in. The values are those kinds of things that the company would talk about, and the strategies where the company is wanting to focus its efforts. And the assumptions, the core things, are really the way we do things around here, and those are sometimes unspoken. There may not be the verbalized values or what's seen in terms of the artifact. Those are just the way we do things. So next slide. So Edgar Schein talked about cultural assumptions. And these cultural assumptions are really a pattern of shared basic assumptions that a group has learned. And the group has learned these as the group solved problems and adapted to external forces and integrated things internally. And these learned the things that they've learned, and the way they've applied them, these have worked well enough that they're considered valid are considered valid by the people within the organization, and therefore they are taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, to think, and to feel in relation to the problems. So if we think back to the XL Food situation, so the XL Food said, well, people at the XL Food were working and say, well, here's how we do things around here. And new people would come in, and they might be trained by HR or by food safety and quality assurance professionals as here's the proper way to wash your hands, and here are the proper ways to do the taking of samples, and here's the proper way to do this and that. But then when they get working with their work unit and the people within their work unit, the people who have been there for working for a while will show the new people how we really do things. And then the new people then end up wanting to fit in with their workmates, and they follow the way things are done around here. Next slide. And so culture implies a stability, of sort of a structural stability and a patterning or an integration of both thought and behavior. And so that's socialized. You're basically socialized into the culture with these assumptions. Next. And so what is a food safety culture then? It's patterns of beliefs, values, and learned behaviors that have developed during an organization's history, which are manifested in the daily activities, and these impact food safety. So this really is a definition of food safety culture when we're looking at it at the core of how things are done in a food plant or food organization. Next. So when we're talking about a negative food safety culture, we're doing a negative and a positive, negative on the left, positive on the right. So a negative food safety culture would be a workplace that lacks management commitment to food safety, has a low perception of how important food safety is. They may not be complying, or actually may not be complying, maybe or covertly doing things against regulatory requirements, and they really don't care about the negative consequences of the actions. On a positive side, we talk about management commitment, and people have said management commitment is what's required for food safety to be, for food safety management systems to happen. And that is important, although it's not the only thing, because as we saw in culture, management commitment can be there, but if it's not followed through all the way, then work unit commitment can have a really strong influence about how how food safety practices are actually done. So management, in a positive food safety culture, management makes food safety a high priority, and that also influences all the way through the operation, so that food safety is a high priority throughout the operation. And not only is the company in compliance with regulation, it meets or exceeds regulations, it's also in compliance with the documented system that it has. So then we'd like to get into the next area, which is really the core area, but I wanted to start off with food safety culture, so we all have this better understanding of what it is we're trying to improve, what it is we're going to focus on in making improvements. So the 7 best practices to improve food safety culture, these are related to a benchmarking study that was done and that was recently published about creating and sustaining a culture of quality. And so I've added a couple of things. I've modified it a little bit from this particular study that was done on quality, but the focus is really the same kinds of things. So there are 7 areas in terms of this that I'm focusing on for food safety culture. The first, leadership, customer focus, measurement, communication, engagement, training, and long-term commitment. So we have a poll next.
Okay.
This is,
yeah.
The next slide has the information on it for people. Okay. And then Simon's going to load the poll for this one.
Just give me a second.
So then while Simon's loading, you can be thinking, so how committed is your senior management to food safety?
Okay.
Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I've loaded that poll.
So at the low end, not committed at all to food safety is 0, and extremely committed to food safety is a 6.
Okay. Can you actually see the results coming in yourself?
Yes, I can see. Yeah. I can see the results. I don't know that the participants can see the results.
I think I think so. Just to say, this is an upgrade to the software, so we're getting to grips with it. I don't think the upgrade to the software is the cause of Brita's problems, but I know some attendees are having problems and they're typing in, having problems. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the link to the YouTube. We're streaming live on YouTube at the moment, so you can actually go and watch there. I'm going to put this link in for you, and then you can use that instead, maybe. Okay, do you want to read the results of the poll out?
Okay, so we have from the extremely committed side, it seems that the majority are at the top end of this. Extremely committed, 28%. At +2, we got 25%. +1, we've got 27%. So that's pretty well even all the way across. At about neutral, neither not committed nor extremely committed, to get 11%. At a sort of leaning towards the not at all committed, we've got 4%, and then 3% and 1%. So this is encouraging to see that the majority are committed to food safety culture, or committed to food safety. And by being committed to food safety, then that would mean that the senior management would be interested then in learning more about the areas where they could make a difference, and what kind of things that they could do to improve the culture of food safety in their establishment. So the first area I wanted to talk about was leadership, and the importance of leadership. Senior management commitment is one element of leadership. There is leadership throughout the organization, but most people talk about leadership meaning senior management leadership. There's leadership all the way through, and we have informal leaders and formal leaders, and so we can talk about leaders in operations. You could talk about like supervisors, lead hands, maybe playing a leadership role. There can also be informal leaders within every one of the work units that you would have, where there is somebody who takes a role, whether they've, in fact, it's not likely a specific position that they have, but just people listen to that person and they want to know what that person's opinion is. And that is also an important area of leadership. But we need to know what that what those kind of people are. We need to involve those people in things. Actually, I'm ahead of myself, and I'm already on the involvement people, engaging people. So let me go back to this leadership about establishing and maintaining a multidisciplinary food safety culture team. So the reason it's important to have a multidisciplinary team in food for a food safety culture team is, if you think about having a HACCP team, you had a HACCP team because it was important to have different people involved in getting HACCP implemented in the organization. When you're talking about culture, you need to be aware that there are different kinds of subcultures in a business. I've given an example here on the slide of 4 generic business subcultures. So executive subculture, their assumption is about getting things profitable. That's their focus. An engineering subculture or maintenance subculture, they want to get things perfect. They want to get things fixed. An R&D, research and development subculture, they're wanting to get things renewed. An operations subculture, they're wanting to get things done. They wanting to get product out the door at the least possible cost, and balancing things that way. Next slide. So when we're looking at a multidisciplinary team, what we would like with a food safety culture team is everybody to be focused on one food safety culture. Even though they're coming at it from different subcultures within the business, everybody should have the food safety culture of making sure food is safe. And that's what that part is about. That's why the reason to have a multidisciplinary team in a food safety culture is they bring different viewpoints. So the next slide, next is then customer focus, is the second item that I had on the best practices. So it's important then to have a customer focus, because if we have a customer focus, then that we can have a clear food safety vision. So the vision isn't just on, well, I'm here working and my job is to get product in the bin, or my job is to cut product, my job is to do this, my job is to that. If we think about it from a bigger picture, and if everybody in the whole operation can be focused more on the customer and food safety with respect to the customer, then we know that we're providing the service for the customer. And the customer is going to want and expect to have a safe product. So how is whatever I am doing in my role, whether I'm in operations, whether I'm in R&D, whether I'm in maintenance, what is it that I'm doing so that I can make sure that I'm going to have a positive influence on food safety, because I'm focused on the customer and want to make sure the customer has a safe product and a good experience with the product that I'm producing. Because that in the end, it can affect me, because it could affect my job if I'm out of work, as the XXXL food people found out when the plant closed for a period of time. And so that's why it's important to have a customer focus, and the customer focus having a clear food safety vision as a best practice. And next. And the third, I've got these slides mixed up. So we'll go with communications third. So the third one is communications, and the communications, when we're talking about food safety culture and having this as a best practice, I want to focus on communications. There are a number of different areas. So one type of communication is internal communication, and letting everybody in the company know that food safety is a priority. and then having different ways to express how food safety is a priority. So I talked earlier about artifacts, about visual ways to show that food safety is a priority. So those are the having food safety as part of the mission or the vision of the company, making sure they're providing the customers with the best possible quality and safety of product. And that's communicated not only to the customer, but also to the employees, the workers, so that they are focused on that. And that's communicated in a number of different ways and presented in a number of different ways. Other types of communication then is a communication that a manager can have or a supervisor can have with the employee, a two-way communication with that. So the supervisor can be providing input and supporting the employee. The employee can be providing feedback. So it's not just a broad-based communication. It's a communication in a number of different ways. So that's a much deeper dive than we can take in the short webinar that we have today. Again, that would be a much longer discussion. So the next slide, please, Simon. So then measurement is also one of the best practices to improve food safety culture. And if we think about measurement from assessing food safety, it's fairly straightforward based on the sciences that we have. We look at microbiology, we look at indicator organisms, and we look at pathogens. From a chemistry side, we look at pH, water activity, time, temperature, and other chemical attributes that we have. And perhaps some, if it's meat, we might add nitrates, or we might use lactic acid, we might use some other kinds of ingredients that we can measure, that we can add, and that we can measure, and we can make a difference. And that's R&D can be involved in that kind of thing in terms of developing formulas that we're going to be using for the products. But then with respect to our social science, there's a different way. Next, Simon. So when we're assessing food safety culture, we're actually wanting to use qualitative and quantitative methods from the social sciences. And again, we don't have time to go into real depth about this, but just be aware that there are some diagnostic tools that are used to measure culture of an organization. And there are a small few diagnostic tools that have been used for food safety culture being worked on to identify how strong food safety culture is and what can be done to improve it, or areas where food safety culture is manifests itself. And there are strengths of these, and there are also limitations to these. So in the picture in here is this example of a survey that has been used to assess food safety culture. Next slide, Simon. And so when we're using a survey to identify quantitatively, then we use statistical analysis, and that helps us to identify which questions relate to another. And so in this, we have different columns, and those columns show the different questions that are shown to relate. And those are the questions then that can be used to help a company be more confident in the results that they're getting. Next slide. And then by taking that statistical analysis, you can actually use things, and you can put them together in terms of a model, and use the information in other approaches in the operation, and apply those, knowing that you've got areas that you measured and areas where you're knowing where you're making a difference. When you measure, you're doing a benchmarking when you're first starting to use any kind of an intervention, and then you want to, over a period of time, measure again later to see if you've made any difference in those particular areas. So this is how social science methods can be used effectively in helping to identify what the level of food safety culture is, and whether you've made any changes to it through interventions. Next slide. So next area that I wanted to talk about in terms of best practice is employee engagement. And there's a lot of talk about employee engagement and how important it is. But we want to think really about what engaging employees means or what it could mean. So in the previous webinar that I gave, I talked about engaging employees while they're in training, because we want to keep people active, you want to keep people thinking, you want to keep people involved. And engagement of involving people encourages them to think. So when you engage with employees, what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to connect with them in some way or other, and you're wanting to encourage feedback and encourage them to give feedback and input to support the efforts that you're trying to do to improve food safety. And so by connecting with them to give them positive feedback about the work that they're doing, and by caring about them as individuals, that then helps to open things up so that they can feel more comfortable giving you information when you're asking for feedback and input. Next slide. And so examples of example here, asking for input is one way to actively involve people, and using suggestion boxes is another way if people feel uncomfortable giving you information directly. There are a number of different ways. I've just given those two just as examples. There are a number of different ways that you can engage and involve people, and by doing so can help to increase their willingness to support and be influenced by the changes that you're wanting to make to improve the food safety culture. And then the next level, next area of best practice is to make sure you do training, and everybody does training. That's a sort of a basic kind of thing. Even if you do training inadvertently through socialization, that's also training. When you've got a structured program for training, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's online, whether it's one-on-one, there are a number of different ways to implement training programs or training initiatives. The purpose of training with respect to food safety culture is for behavior to change and to improve. And so we want people to learn for that reason. And the kind of factors that influence change are the physical settings, because sometimes the people want to change, they've learned the information, but they're not always able to sometimes, because the physical setting is preventing them from adopting the practices that they've been trained to do, or the physical setting is giving them the opportunity to take shortcuts, so they might do that even though they know that they learned the information, they know what the right way is to do, but they still have the opportunity to make shortcut. So perhaps that's one of the factors that's a factor that would be influencing why people aren't doing things the way they might have been trained to do in the operation. Other factors that influence change or the non-change are whether the employee really does know the correct actions to take. So they were in training, but did that training really stick? What kind of support is given following the training to ensure that people understood what it was that they were trained to do? And then the third area that influences change is whether the employee has any real motivation to act in the way that they've been trained to do. Next slide, please. So then that's why reinforcement of training is really important. So training itself alone isn't enough. Reinforcement has to happen. And again, in the previous presentation that I gave, I said that the training activity itself is maybe the least important of all. Reinforcement of training afterwards is really key, because when you're wanting behavior to change, you're actually having to help people change habits or the way they have been doing things, the way they've been used to doing things. So it's going to take a while for that to happen. Providing feedback by observing them, watching what they're doing, and finding them doing things correct way, and giving them positive feedback about doing things correctly is a really good way to give feedback, because then that helps people know that you are paying attention, that you really do care about the training that you provided and what it is that they're doing. You care about what they're doing. And if you care about what they're doing, then they can also start to care about what they're doing. They see that really is important. And that again ties back to the part about customer focus. We're doing this for the customer to make sure that the customer has safe product. And then if there is a problem, we want to look at the root cause of the problem. Where does the root cause of the issue really lie? Was it in a physical setting, or kind of the way that we have established the line, like I talked about in the previous slide? Or is there another issue? Is the root cause of the issue related to some people? And is there something that we could be doing differently with the people in our business to address a different type of root cause than a physical setting or lack of knowledge? Next slide. And then the seventh area that I talk about in terms of best practice is a sustaining and improving, is long-term commitment. There are so many different possibilities that could take place. There's so many different ways we could do things, and there are also so many different things that can take us off our track of wanting to be focused on food safety culture. And being committed in the long term by wanting to make sure that food safety culture is a foundational value within our company, that's really important, because we can stay focused on that. What's the next slide, please? Oh, I'm ahead of myself on this one. So back up a second. So the long-term commitment part is on what we want to do with long-term commitment is we want to remember that food safety culture team, and work with that food safety culture team have that food safety culture team work to sustain and improve food safety culture over the long term. And when we're looking at the long term, that means that we recognize that we may not be able to implement things right away, today, right now, or next week, or next month, because there's a balance of how we're going to continue continue with our operations, make changes within our operations, and continue to improve the food safety culture in the long term. So a long-term commitment for a culture change, we could be talking for a complete culture change, it's 3 to 5 years. But there are things that are going to be happening all the way along to show that we're committed to making those changes. And this continuous improvement is a part of food safety culture. It's part of quality culture and also part of food safety culture, is this continuous improvement. That's built in also to a number of the food safety management systems, is this idea of continuous improvement. So the long-term commitment is what's going to make this not a program, not something that food safety culture can't be a program. It can't be something that's going to be here today and gone tomorrow. It's an ongoing, committed, focused effort over the long term. And the only way we'll really know whether food safety culture has taken hold is when those people who have been involved in the implementation of the developing of and the advancing of the food safety culture have retired, have moved on, and the food safety culture is still strong and stays. That's when we're going to know that the food safety culture is really now the way we do things around here. So the next slide. So what I'd like you to do now is to focus is to think about, I'd like you to reflect and think about what is one thing in your workplace that supports a positive food safety culture. So even of those of you who said you've got a negative commitment from your senior management with respect to food safety, is there what one thing could you think of that could show that there's something positive about the food safety culture in your organization? And with those of you, all the way to the rest of all the way to the other end of the spectrum, extremely committed, what are some examples of what's one example that you can say your company has shows the supports a positive food safety culture? You can type your responses in the chat box, please.
Just while they're typing in there, one point that I just want to pick up on when you're talking about continuous improvement, a good platform for that that's built into a lot of food safety management systems is the management review meeting, where annually senior management sit down and review the performance of the food safety management system, and look then to plan. It's normally an annual thing, and then look to plan for the next year. Where do we need to improve? What's gone wrong? What resources do we need? What training? What support, etc. And just having that process then refreshes and reinvigorates the drive for continual improvement. Because as you mentioned, Britta, that often, you go down blind alleys, you make mistakes. Continual improvement isn't a straight line. There's ups and downs, but to keep that constancy of purpose, you need to have that regular refresh with senior management and the food safety team and the etc.
Yes, exactly. And and a lot of places will have a HACCP team. They'll have in many of the larger organizations you'll have health and safety teams. And so these teams meet on a regular basis, but we talk about safety culture, but companies don't always talk about food safety culture. And by using some of the same approaches that have been used in the safety culture field, you'll be able to see the kinds of things that could be done in the food safety culture to help food safety culture advance. Yeah,
it transfers across. Yeah, it's just about getting people together willing to discuss with an open mind and having a common goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're typing in there in the chat. You can see.
So we got the communication. There's a food safety newsletter. I've seen management commitment. I've seen that management is putting money into they're putting money into food safety. Yeah. So we've got a number of ongoing food safety training, quality commitment, training, communications. No one gets fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no one gets fired. So that's right. So there are two different ways of looking at that. So if no one gets fired, then they're trained and they're given positive feedback, they're not fired if they're giving input into things, and they're not fired if they make mistakes, because if they're making mistakes, there could be a training issue, there could be some other kinds of issues. So so the ongoing food safety training program. Yeah, so absolutely. These are the kinds of things that I wanted people to reflect on this, and I'll show you later about the reflection why. So why I wanted to do that. So the next area, give me the next slide, please, Simon. So I wanted to just summarize. So we're just summarizing here. I wanted to summarize that there are 3 levels of culture that Dr. Shine talks about. The artifacts, or the visible types of things. They're the organizational structures and processes that we can see, that people can see when they walk in the plant. They're the values that the senior management holds, and the and the values that the senior management tries to instill, the strategies that they take, the approaches that they take to work, and those are all also elements of culture. But the core thing about the culture, the core element is the way we do things around here when no one is looking. That is really what tells us the strength of the culture. And so that's the summary of the culture area. Next slide then. And so then the summary for the best practices to improve safety culture are: one is to maintain a food safety culture team. The second, to have a clear food safety culture vision. Third is to assess a food safety culture regularly. So once a year or more often if possible. Actually, that's not. Once a year to assess it, or when I say regularly, I was going to say making sure that you communicate effectively more regularly than once a year. So assessing food safety culture by measuring it is the third one. Communicating effectively, up, down, sideways, in a number of different ways to make sure the message of the food safety is important gets across. Involving employees in the participation so that they're engaged, in the training so that they're engaged also in supporting food safety culture, in supporting food safety. Providing training and reinforcing that training, providing food safety training and reinforcing that food safety training in a number of different ways, and sustaining the culture that you've got and improving it, always focusing on continued improvement. And next slide, please, Simon. And so then the summary of this webinar then is, it goes back again to the training aspect of things. So there are three areas really that help people learn, help people with whenever they're learning something. The first is a learning activity. So the webinar sections that we just covered here is the learning activity. I also had you do some response, and response is important because that interaction and that thinking and reflection helps people to get that into their minds, gets their brains thinking about things. And because in the end, I would like some sort of behavior change, because I'm a trainer by training and as well as food safety specialist, I would like behavior change. So what I'd like to ask of you is something about the application of learning. So the plan of action. So the next slide, please, Simon. So what I'd like you to think of, and you don't have to type it into the chat, but if you can type it in the chat, that would be fine. I want you to think, though, about this question. What am I going to do in the next 3 months as a result of this webinar? And this is, again, relates to behavior, personal application, perhaps behavior change. So if you could type it in the response box, chat box, that would be great. But I do want you to think about that personally, just to get yourself thinking about what this, you just spent an hour on the webinar, and how is that going to be useful to you? And so personal application behavior change is ideally what it would be about.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe people need to have a think about that in their own organization, where perhaps they need to improve and how they can influence and help to steer and drive that improvement. It's not easy often. A lot of the attendees here will be probably middle management, quality managers, food safety managers. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, Britta, I used to be one of those. And sometimes in the meat, in the sandwich, you know, you don't feel you're getting the support of senior management or the bottom, maybe operations or even the shop floor, and trying to battle your way through, knowing what you need to do and what you want to do, but struggling to get that buy-in often. It's very difficult.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to focus a little bit more in the presentation that I gave. I wanted to I spent more time talking about the involving people and the reinforcement of training, that kind of thing, because that's where I think that food safety professionals can perhaps have the biggest influence themselves if they're the only one that that's interested in food safety culture, in improving food safety culture, that I think is where people can make the difference. They can make a difference by connecting with the workers, by connecting with their technicians, by helping their technicians, the food safety and quality people that they're working with, helping them to learn how to connect with the workforce. And that, because people who are the workers on the line are people first. They're not workers first, they're people first. And by connecting with them and letting them know that you care and that you're interested, and sharing a communication that way, that can help you to gain their support, gain their support for providing feedback, providing suggestions for improvement, those kinds of things. And then that can help when you're wanting to do some observations and they're not going to feel like you're the food safety police. Because I think that being the food safety police is where there have been a disconnect between operations and food safety and quality, where people get uptight when food safety quality comes by because they think they're going to get into trouble. And that's where I'm thinking that we can make a difference. If all the rest else is not going well around us or not supportive around us, that I think we can still engage in an individual level. At least I'm hoping that's possible. Yeah. Maybe I'm being optimistic in the really tough areas where people said they really had no support for food safety. Yeah. But I think in the other plants that would be well received. I'm hoping.
Yeah, and you can see from in the chat that a lot of members are taking away some practical ideas. A light bulb's gone on, and lots of different ideas of what they can do in their particular organizations. So that's good. Yeah,
reinforcing quality and food safety. Yeah, reinforced training. Just trying to go down some of these that are down farther. So monthly newsletters, including food safety in a monthly newsletter.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Formalize a food safety plan. Look at tools to measure and evaluate food safety culture. Yep, there are a number of them. If you could email me, then I can perhaps help you out with that. The last slide has my contact information on it. That's the next one, Simon.
Okay, I'll just leave that up for a minute, and then we'll go into the Q&A then, if we can.
Yeah. And someone was asking about the previous webinar. That's maybe you can tell them where they can find that.
I will do that. I did pick up on that. Okay, so I'm back on webcam now, I think. So
yes, you are. I see you.
So we'll start to go through some of the questions. Did you, Shingai has asked, could you please provide the food safety climate tool that you developed, published in 2010? Is that right? Did you develop some sort of food safety?
Yeah, that was through my PhD work. Yes, I did that. I was working with Maple Leaf Foods to develop that. Yeah.
Is that something that you sell, is available, is free, or whatever? What?
That I'm working with. If people send me an email, then I can connect with them about that.
Right. Okay. Let's have a look what else we've got. Just give me a second. Is there a certification for food safety culture or not? I wonder if there's not an ISO standard for food safety culture, is there, where you can get accredited or certified for?
Food safety culture is a new, developing a food safety culture is a new field. It's been talked about more and more and more, and I think that that now it's recognized that in order to make further progress in the food safety arena, we've got to start focusing on people. Instead of trying to control microorganisms, we've got to start working on helping people understand the impact that they have on food safety, on the product.
Yeah, so controlling larger organisms, maybe. No.
Yes, controlling people organisms. Yes.
Controlling's not. Controlling's not the right word, is it? Really, that's a negative controlling. It's more stimulating them to do the right thing and exhibit the right behaviour.
That's right. Yes.
Within your presentation, Britta, you had like a statistical tool, a diagnostic tool. Is there a link for that or anything? Do you know the source?
No,
for
that's the tool that that somebody asked about. That's a survey that I've developed for that was a survey that I've developed. There are a couple of other surveys that have been sort of bounced around, but they're not specific to food safety culture. They're trying to they're attempting to go there, but nothing. I'm not sure what's been validated that's publicly available.
Right.
Okay. So that, because some companies have proprietary surveys, and those are the ones that they sell, or if you go with that company, then you'll get that company's survey.
Okay.
And I think there are some larger companies that have done measures internally, and I don't know what survey that they've used or how they've done an assessment.
Okay. Also, well, Ali has asked, is there a structured program to build a food safety culture in the workplace? You know, an A to Z of how to build a food safety culture.
Not specifically. That's something that I'm working on.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. So hold on to that thought, Dipendra, and maybe something coming soon from Britta. So we'll keep you posted about that. Can we get a copy of your previous webinar you did? Yes, IFSQN YouTube channel. If you just type into YouTube IFSQN, and then you'll see all the previous webinars there. Also, all the previous webinars are available from the IFSQN website on the videos tab. So they are available. So just search there. Gayan's asked, can you arrange a separate webinar on measuring food safety culture using those statistical modeling techniques in future? So a more in-depth about measuring food safety culture. Possibility, it depends on the interest in that, but yes. Krista, as a consultant, I can preach FSC till I am blue in the face. How do I express to my clients that it is truly important to have a food safety culture and protect our consumer?
Okay, so yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that you almost have to come at it from a business perspective, really, because people are looking at it as so what difference is food safety culture going to make to my business? Well, it was like if we even look at it from a quality. So what difference is focusing on quality going to make to my business? So if we focus on quality and we improve quality, we're improving processes. By improving those processes, we can actually become more efficient, reduce waste, reduce rework, reduce a number of other things like that, and simply by focusing on quality. So we need to tie in food safety culture to the business side of things and a return on investment and what difference that can make to the company's bottom line. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense to say, well, we'd really like to have a food safety culture because that's just a nice thing to have. There's a reason that companies have said it's important to have a culture of food safety, because the company could, in the longer term, not have to do so much policing and inspection and save money that way by encouraging the culture of food safety so that everybody is focusing on food safety.
Yeah.
Because everything we do considers food safety, and so it doesn't have to be an add-on. It doesn't have to be a cost factor.
Yeah. It's almost like, as we were discussing yesterday, you've almost got to be, as a food safety manager or quality manager in an organisation, understanding those different subcultures and drivers of, let's say, operations have got their driver, senior management have got their main focus, engineering have, and understanding what those drivers are, what their challenges are, what floats their boat, and almost being a behavioral psychologist and just pressing the right buttons and manipulating in a way. And you might talk to an engineering manager completely different to how you're discussing with a senior manager, although you're talking about the same things.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So it comes back to the multidisciplinary team slide that had those as an example, the 4 areas, the 4 generic big business subcultures that we talk about. So you talk about it from ways that they understand. It's like when you're talking to somebody on the production line, you're not going to talk to them in the same way. You're not going to use the same words as you would if you're talking to the president, because they understand things from a different perspective.
Exactly. Okay. Culture change, food safety culture, it's a huge topic, and there's only so much you can do in an hour or so. So I think we've done the best we can today, Britta. So thanks very much for your presentation today. It was a great primer, and you struggled on despite the challenges that we faced, with no webcam. I found it difficult with trying to do the slides while trying to manage the chat and things. So it's been very challenging today, but hopefully the attendees have gained something. And when you asked that open question before, what you're going to take away and use in the next 3 months, people have managed to think of things straight away. And not only that, I'm sure over the coming weeks that more thoughts will stimulate in their minds that they can use practically. So thank you, Britta, again, from myself and everybody at the IFSQM.
All right. Thank you, Simon.
So hopefully, I know that's your last one this year, but hopefully we'll see you again in the not too distant future, and we'll look at some of those, maybe going into some of the things in more detail and expanding on some of the topics.
Yes, that would be exciting.
Okay. Brilliant. So thanks very much for today, Britta.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've just, if you go to the pop-ins tab, you could be able to get your certificate for this week. If you click on the download now button, and then on the page you go to, there should be a button on the right to download your certificate. So if you can do that. Next week, we have Emma Weston, teacher and industrial advisor at the University of Nottingham. And the title of Emma's webinar is Teaching Techniques to Embed Scientific Principles and Food Safety. Basically, Emma's works at the University of Nottingham in the UK, and they're preparing students, graduates to be oven ready, to be able to go straight into industry and make an impact and hit the ground running. So she's going to share some of the teaching techniques that they use there, and perhaps we can use some of those in our organisations to make our new employees oven ready and ready to hit the ground running and do the right things in our organisations. So hopefully you'll register for that. I'll be sending emails out over this next week. Thanks again. This new software, we need to get to grips with it. Sorry about the technical difficulties today, but we've done our best and we've managed to struggle through yet again. We're on week 18. We've got another, we're not even halfway through the year yet, so we've got another 20 odd webinars to go. So it's been good to be here today, and I'll see you again in the near future.